I'm still excited about models that are trying to like simulate physics and do more physical stuff in the real world in combination with language models and machine learning. I feel like I haven't maybe beat this drum publicly enough. Maybe I've only beat it privately within companies so far. Is like we should have interfaces that really deeply explain to us how these models work, secret tactics that are not built into the interface at all and are not taught to me as a user. Try very hard never to treat models as oracle. You still need someone to translate human needs and like communicate with the designers and communicate with the PMs, and like there will never not be a human developer who needs to manage this process.
Hello, Internet. Welcome back to the Code and Content Podcast, the podcast for conversations at the intersection of code and content. I first met today's guest, Maggie Appleton, at React Advanced London, I think in 2022, and she gave this great talk, which you must watch, and I will link in the show notes, all about visuals as it comes to understanding paradigms in programming and visuals for education. And I left that talk so motivated that yes, visuals are the future of developer education. And unfortunately, in the years since, we've probably gone more text-based than ever before. User interfaces are being deprioritized, and all we do now is type prompts into chatbots and watch the results fly. So I wanted to talk to Maggie about how this future looks, what she thinks of this. Is there a future for user interfaces once again? And what I found most interesting in this chat was how to use large language models and AI tooling in creative work, because that's not always easy. If you ask ChatGPT for like, give me 10 titles for this marketing page, it'll give you just the most average, boring title. So trying to get creative work out of large language models, take some finessing, take some prompt engineering. We get into that in this conversation. Sit back and enjoy. Maggie, thanks for joining me on the Code and Content Podcast today. And something I hadn't mentioned earlier as well, there is so much construction happening around me in the house as well. So like that's where I am at the moment, is that at any moment a grinder or a hammer could start going. I'm wondering, where are you joining us from and what's exciting you at the moment before we go any further?
Oh, sure. I am joining from South London. There's no construction here. Very peaceful, quiet, sunny. Birds are chirping. Spring is arriving. And what's exciting me at the moment is, it's like too cliche to like have this be my take, but I am genuinely excited about like Claude 3.7 and the current state of like code generation and cursor. Like I know that's like the, stereotypical topic for devs to be excited about, but I'm building so many prototypes that I would not have been able to build before, totally on my own, like full stack, just like stuff that I never would have tackled before, but I'm now completely capable of doing because I think I've gotten pretty good at prompting, but like me plus Claude 3.7, we're like a pretty good team.
Yeah. No, that's funny you should say that. I feel like I've reserved the right to stay cynical about AI for about as long as I could, but I've crossed the threshold in the last few weeks where it's like, I'll admit defeat, these things aren't going away, and it's just part of our lives now. So that's very cool. The reason I wanted to have you on the podcast, I remember seeing your talk at React Advanced a number of years ago about creating visuals and visual paradigms for programming as a part of like learning how to understand programming concepts. And I remember really enjoying that talk at the time and being motivated as I left to think, oh, yes, visuals are the future and we should really go down that rabbit hole. And the world's changed in the 3 or 4 years since that. And like we've said, now we're just writing into text boxes, or like I'm not even writing into them anymore. I'm using voice dictation to write my prompts now. And it feels like interfaces are more text-based than ever before. So what, I guess is a really general question to start with, but like, do you think something's been lost? Like, is there an opportunity been lost, or is this a really natural way to work with interfaces because we don't have to be visual anymore? I'm just wondering sort of where do we put that visual versus text-based interface in the age of AI?
Yeah. So my current take on this is we're in a phase that I think is a necessary phase. And we'll eventually come out of it. I hope sooner rather than later, but honestly, it might take a while. And that phase is, it must have been 2 years ago now. Really popular post went around called "Text is the Universal Interface." And a lot of people kind of echoing this sentiment, this idea that now that we have language models, we don't need user interfaces anymore. Like everything is just a text box or a chat bot. And we're all just going to type in text into these things, and somehow it will do all possible tasks in the world through this like text-based chatbot. I will say everyone who espoused this opinion was obviously like a developer who works in text all day long. I was like, it's just, I appreciate how they got to that conclusion, but I'm like, what about photographers and graphic designers and architects and surgeons and like nurses and like literally any other kind of job that does not involve typing text into a computer, where you have to use not just visuals and graphics on a screen, but embodiment, physicality, movement in space, like physics. Like it was just such a naive take. But I think we're kind of in a necessary phase of going through people obsessing over text-based interfaces. I feel like we're now in a phase where people are like, oh, okay, I see how more graphical, rich user interfaces enable different kinds of interactions with language models. I think we're getting to that phase. But I'm waiting for us to move beyond that. Like, I'm still excited about models that are trying to like simulate physics and do more physical stuff in the real world in combination with language models and machine learning. So yeah, that's my take.
So the environment as the interface perhaps is the next frontier. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's a critical skill for anybody in this space as well to just click into the profile of the person saying what the future is going to be like, because there's always, they happen to run an AI startup of some description. That's why they're very pro this way of working. Yeah.
And they've lived their whole life in text, right? All they've done is ever write documents and write code and write specs, and they've never in their life like drawn a thing.
Yeah, that's right. So when it comes to understanding these things, how do you feel about like the role of educational materials anymore otherwise? Because like that talk that I'm referencing as well, and I'll make sure there's a link to it in the show notes, was about trying to understand paradigms, understanding JavaScript through interpreting visual, understanding different concepts like that. When we no longer need to learn a topic deeply in order to use that tool, I'm starting to wonder how deeply will people research the tools they're using? Because like we said, I can do things that I was never capable of because I'm not doing them. The LLM is doing them.
Yes. I'll say this is one of my I feel like I haven't maybe beat this drum publicly enough. Maybe I've only beat it privately within companies so far. But the way that we're currently designing interfaces to language models or like any machine learning system is very black box at the moment, right? Like you type something into ChatGPT or Claude or whatever it is, even Cursor, and it like gives you a very verbose response. And only now, even in the last like couple of weeks, have you seen like the deep reasoning features that OpenAI and Perplexity and DeepSeek all released?
You see the demos of them, yeah.
Yeah, where essentially these reasoning models, quote unquote, all it's doing is like adds an extra visible step in to the user where it shows you the model thinking before it replies, which has been shown to improve the final answer. But it's trying to expose a little bit of how the model works, but it's not actually exposing how the model works. It's just doing this one like visible reasoning step. But really, like the ideal future we should be moving towards, which I do think a lot of people are on the same boat with this, is like we should have interfaces that really deeply explain to us how these models work and how they reason and show us step by step all the decisions they're making along the way that allow us to both vet its final answer and go back and edit the reasoning train, the tree, to say, okay, well, 5 steps ago, I don't think the quality of sources you used was high enough. So let's like edit that and then change the downstream answer. I'm seeing this a little bit, like Perplexity is kind of exploring it. OpenAI is kind of exploring it, but not sincerely and not in like serious context of use. Like this is what I'm waiting for Cursor to kind of get on, is like, take me through a slow step-by-step reasoning process with a model. Show me every decision it's making along the way. I know that's difficult to do. You really have to architect that into the system. But I find the black box approach so troublesome because you end up in situations where like junior developers would just prompt Cursor to build the whole thing for them. They have no idea what's in the files. They don't know how anything's chained together. Like there should be a step in there where Cursor teaches them what it's done, not just doing the thing.
Yeah, because the easiest thing to do is see all of that progress and then great, start typing the next message, right? And I'm guilty of that. Certainly, it'll even write out the full description of what it did, but unless you take the time to go back and read it. And that does sound like a cool idea to be able to go back and sort of visually navigate through that decision chain. So I think I've seen a number of people, maybe I even saw it in your timeline as well, like a great way to improve prompts is to say, hey, think of 3 or 4 solutions first before choosing one, right? But that feels like more work than we should have to do, right? Like if that was natively built into the platform, you say, that might help those.
Yeah, otherwise, like people like us, the users, we have to become prompt engineers. Like that's what I've had to do to get Cursor to work well for me, is to like read tons on prompt engineering and like experiment with tons of different prompts and like figure out these like secret tactics that are not built into the interface at all and are not taught to me as a user. So it's like I need the tool to teach me how to use it well, and it's not doing that right now.
Yeah, it's interesting if we bring it back to user interfaces. like you've always said keyboard shortcuts, but they're hidden away. But a pro user will go to find those keyboard shortcuts because you'll see them in the menus. And I love like Linear does that in its user interface. I'm not sure if you've used it as well, but like it'll show you the keyboard shortcut alongside of every action that you can take. So you should be learning the faster way to do it. But yeah, like if you're just typing into a black box, it's not necessarily teaching you via the interface how to write better prompts.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite tip for like improving prompts? I don't think I'm a great prompt engineer at the best of times. I don't know if there's like some hacks or tips or something that I need to adopt.
Oh, that's hard. So it so depends on the context. I think I try very hard never to treat models as oracle. Like I don't ever ask for the answer. I usually go, okay, I assume you don't have the answer. I assume I might have the answer, but I'm going to use you more as a rubber duck or like a reasoning mirror. And ask questions where you can help me like uncover information about, let's say, the code base I'm working in, like help explain to me what this function does, help me find where in the code this is being called, like help me understand the context and then reason with me to like solve the problem together is how I try to approach prompting. So I try not to ask just like, can you just do this? And instead go, okay, let's think through together how we might implement this feature.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so interrogate the problem together, not just expect it to have all the answers. That makes sense.
Yeah. And then there's some really, stupid wins where you just say, you are an incredibly skilled senior developer. Like, you think very carefully about everything that you do. Like, you explain your reasoning. You're incredibly smart. You write those things in and it performs better.
Incredible. Maybe, I guess it must work for us too, right? Like, if I started with those affirmations, maybe I'd do better prompting in every morning. I find myself occasionally disappointed, lack of creativity from LLMs. I'm not sure if, again, this comes back to prompt engineering. That's why I'm triggered to ask this is, I do a bit of marketing and that sort of thing as well. You're trying to ask it for creative titles or creative taglines and this sort of thing. And it is always the most average text. And I think that is actually perhaps the large language model's primary, like it's what it's best at is really bad marketing copy. So I feel like there's an inherent lack of creativity in what we get back from these models. Is that fair? Like, or is that just can that be solved with better prompts?
Yeah, I think there's some approach here that's to better prompts that actually relates to the kind of thinking I was just talking about and how we prompt these models. Because you're right, if you ask Claude or ChatGPT to like name an app for you or like help you come up with like a snazzy title for an essay, it's awful at it. But then if you take the approach where you're like, okay, if I use most of my creative thinking and just use this as like a little assistant who can help me with very specific things, but not the big thing, which is like give me a good name for an essay. Whenever you're like, okay, this is going to be about, whatever it is, like describe your topic long form and then just say, what are some possible metaphors around this? Like I use it to brainstorm metaphors, which is sometimes cliche, but when it gives me the list of the cliche ones, I go, okay, I didn't really mean like that. Like let's go more in this direction. And if you do it at least like 10 or 12 times, I feel like then I can maybe get to more interesting stuff. But using it more to help with like lateral thinking and like a thesaurus in a certain way too, what other words relate to this word. So yeah, I feel like you have to kind of like find your own ways through it, but it's never going to be like genuinely creative or original or off the bat, but can be used with you to like, help you find the right information.
It doesn't generate great text creatively, but we do have generative AI to generate images as well, sort of getting back to that thought of like, generating visuals to understand concepts better. We usually see generative AI to generate just like churn out, terrible images that just populate blog posts and spam articles and this sort of thing. Do you think is there a future where like that image generation is actually going to be like for useful diagrams and this sort of thing? Maybe that's already happening in a space I'm not aware of, I hadn't seen.
Yeah, it's not happening much yet. I'm waiting for this. I'm very excited about this happening. I think Eraser is the closest thing I've seen. Eraser is where you can put in a text description of your code base. I think maybe you can put in like code files too, and it helps generate a diagram of like your architecture or how certain functions chain together, which is really cool. I've used it for a few projects where, I definitely double check the output and go, is that really the architecture of the app? But I love what they're trying to do. And I think actually their quality is getting pretty good. So they're the company I think of for like trying to do useful generative diagrams. And there's a lot of possibility in this space, but I do also think many years before we get it right, just because the traditional image generators, like the Midjourneys and the whatever's DALL-E, the way they generate images is never going to be able to be used to like generate diagrams or useful like instructional images, just because of the process. It's too just like copy based off the pixels you've seen, make more pixels like this, which is why you get like wonky text and like, things that don't make sense.
Yeah, like a dream sort of usually.
Yeah, versus what the kind of architecture you would need is much more structured. It would be like, okay, take in the concept, like break down the component parts of it, like do a bunch of text-based thinking first, brainstorm metaphors, think about composition and structure, and then maybe generate like an SVG based on that content. But I think you would need quite a tight reasoning chain that I haven't seen anyone attempt to do yet.
Mm. And I always wonder about taking this to its logical conclusion. At what point do we no longer need to understand the system, and because the system's going to take care of itself? Do you sort of just blank those thoughts out, or is that? I guess nobody truly knows, but it makes me wonder. Like, it's nice hand holding and feeling like you're participating in this whole creative process for now. But I do wonder, like, are they just not going to need me anymore to hold their hands?
I think we're quite a ways away from that. I know we all like to make hype predictions about like when will be the end of developers. I'm betting never, obviously.
I'm long humans.
Yes, very long humans. Because, right, again, it's like even if we manage to scale up context windows and like inference and everything to the degree where you could put in like, just think of like the biggest code base you've ever worked on. Like, I don't understand how big that context window would need to be for it to truly not screw things up. At the moment, I don't know if you've tried out like Devon is one of the more automated code engines.
I haven't tried Devon, no.
It's okay. The failure rate is extremely high and just usually fails on all kinds of things, or just makes really dumb mistakes, or just gives up after like 30 rounds of iteration. Anyway, we're very far away from like genuinely automating anyone's job, even if they are the most junior developer in the world. So I have trouble taking too seriously the short-term predictions of like all developers will go away. But even if we get a big, huge context window and it can like make its own PRs and like implement whole features without any bugs and without any side effects, I think we're many years away from that. You still need someone to translate human needs and like communicate with the designers and communicate with the PMs. And like there will never not be a human developer who needs to manage this process.
Understand problems being solved for people that we can charge the money for. Yeah.
Yeah, genuinely. Who's going to sell it to the humans? Like AIs are not going to be good at that.
Yes. Yeah. Well, if that's the last skill that we've got that's unique to us, then we'll have to lean into it. That's cool. I guess the last question I've got primarily is because all of this moves so quickly. I find it difficult to know like who to trust or where to get your news from. Is there any particular like place that you learn all this stuff? Because like just this morning I'm looking up MCPs because I see that in my timeline enough. I've got to get on board. I've got to figure this out. But like, where do you go next other than some hype Twitter post or BlueSky post? I'm not sure.
It probably is BlueSky. I think I've tried quite hard to like follow the right people or people who I think are quite high signal in the space. So when I see posts on that timeline, some people I give more or less credence to. But I feel like I have quite a good quality curated feed of people who are like sharing the latest research papers, like kind of, tell if there has been a big release by one of the major foundation companies, like posting about that, giving their thoughts on it. I'll say Simon Willison is very good. His link blog like is great. He really stays on top of all the AI news and like gives critical takes on them. Latent Space is a really good newsletter. And then apart from that, I do just kind of follow individuals in these companies. I kind of have people who are in Google DeepMind and people who work at Anthropic and key people who will always kind of spread the major news. I keep an eye on their feeds.
For sure. All right. I'll make sure there's links in the show notes for all those as well. Or we could just have a look at people you're following on BlueSky.
I'll see if I can find like a BlueSky. What are they called? The starter packs?
Starter packs. Yeah.
So many of these. Yeah.
There's got to be at least one AI people starter pack out there.
100,000.
That's right. All right, cool. Is there anything really exciting you in this space, or you feel like we've left off the table here? I think this has been good. I like to keep these things short, but if there's anything I think we should cover.
No, I think we've done pretty well. I'll say the only thing I'm interested in at the minute, if anyone else is like researching this or working on products around it, I'd love to hear from them, is I'm trying to build prototypes that encourage us to like teach us how to do better critical thinking with language models. That's like my big thing at the moment. It's like, how do I get it to not just give me an answer, but teach me how to be a more rigorous thinker and enable me to go through a process that does that. And I'm kind of looking for companies or people who are also interested in that research space. So if anyone listening is into that, you can reach out to me on BlueSky.
Yeah, no, that sounds really interesting, and definitely a problem I've felt using these tools is that I'm doing incredible work. I'm not learning anything about what I'm doing. So, that's definitely a problem to be solved. So, very cool. All right, thanks for joining me on Code and Content today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.